So, Lone Rider here, and a while ago I talked about how old school mountain bikes, bikes from back in the day, didn't necessarily suck, despite what a lot of people have been saying lately. I think the trend is always to just kind of assume that the way things are now are better than the way they were before, because after all, we're taught to believe in progress and advancement and in things, in fact, getting better. But pretty much all inventions and all progress have trade-offs, right? To make a bike more durable, you often have to make it heavier. You can have suspension, but then it's not going to maybe handle as well as a rigid bike for some things. On the other hand, obviously the suspension has an advantage, etc. You can have shifting and drivetrains that are designed to work more as an integrated system. They're going to perform better in and of themselves, perhaps, but the more fine-tuned drivetrains might, have other downsides. They might sacrifice parts compatibility, the ability to mix and match certain types of shifters, or, they might be less durable, going to, for example, higher number of gears in the back, you increase your chain angle in more extreme configurations, and then you have, greater risk of cross-chaining and problems and wear from that. So on and so forth. Basically, everything has a trade-off. That's, it's both good and bad. I mean, it's just the way it is. But the bikes themselves weren't horrible. Do modern ones have more and different types of features? Yes, but the bikes back then were pretty darn cool. However, what I want to talk about here is the riders, not the bikes. And the reason is I've recently spent a little bit of time on some of my rigid bikes, which, I've had for a while. But I've mostly used them just on the pavement, on the street, riding them around town, things like that, or on dirt or gravel roads. I haven't really done any, a lot anyway, off-roading on rigid frames these last few years, because one of the things about getting older is, you're often not in the same shape you were when you were younger. And for a lot of us, getting older also means getting wider, which doesn't help in that department. However, one of the things that I've come to wonder is when a rider gets on a bike that is analogous to the bike that they started with years ago. My first mountain bike did not have shocks. I actually had to have the shocks installed myself after I tweaked the fork. My first mountain bike only had 7 gears in the back, similar to this. My first mountain bike had flat bars and bar ends, and something like this is actually a similar setup, more or less. The question I have to ask myself is it harder to ride a rigid frame now that I'm older, that it's been an intervening, 20-some years? Is it harder for me to ride that because I'm just older and more out of shape, and maybe, bumps are a little more uncomfortable when you're older? And or is it that I've lost perishable skills in terms of how to ride a bike like that? Because in the intervening years, I've been riding bikes that have suspension. In fact, that have front suspension, and in some cases, dual suspension. And that's a good question. The question of, are we as cyclists losing skills? Right? I think a very good case could be made that riders like myself that originally learned to ride on rigid frames, if we haven't been riding on rigid frames a lot over the years, that we have lost perishable skills. I don't think there's any question of that. But then you have, what about people who never learned to ride a rigid bike at all? They've not only lost, I should say, not only have have existing riders like myself lost perishable skills and skills of useful in handling a bike like this, but people who've never ridden one have never even learned those skills. And there's a whole skill set, there's a whole pantheon of techniques that are dying off, that are essentially fading away from the world of cycling. And, you know, I honestly do have to wonder if riding a bike like this actually makes you a better rider. You know, riders nowadays, with the bikes they have, with much more travel, with front and rear suspension, with disc brakes, etc., all these things which have their advantages in their place. On one hand, they can do stuff that back in the day, you know, most of us would be like, well, you can't do that, right? And the reason is because the bikes are designed for it. But the downside is that if you took that same rider, you know, the guy who could stick maybe a 5-foot drop on a modern bike, and you put him on an old school bike, he might not even be able to ride a cross-country single-track trail. At least not nearly as well as somebody from back in the day. And, you know, I can say that because, I mean, I was able to ride a bike like this off-road, actual off-roading back in the day. And the truth is, when I try it now, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And it's not difficult because, you know, I don't think there's going to be some aspect of, well, you're older, you're heavier, you're not in as good shape as you were when you were 19. Of course not. But that's not what I'm noticing. What I'm noticing essentially is that I don't have the skills anymore to do it. And I think that's because the intervening years I've spent a lot of time on bikes with suspension. And suspension is certainly an awesome invention. I'm glad they invented it, and I'm glad they're still perfecting it. And I think it's a wonderful thing. But I also think that there is a place for the basic bike handling skills that you learn on a bike like this, that I personally would like to rediscover. So what I'm going to try and do, this particular bike I have built up with a single front chainring. It was built up as kind of a gravel road bike. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put the front back to the way it was with at least the interior gear. I may leave the outside gear off because I never really feel like I need anything bigger than the gear that's on there. So I may just leave this homemade dash guard on where the outside gear used to be. But as far as the inside gear, I'm going to put that back on, hook up a front shifter, and I'm going to try and ride this off-road again. And same thing with my Univega 503. That actually has a full complement of front and rear gears, and you know, could be ridden off-road tomorrow. It's been raining these past few weeks, and the trails are all muddy. Enough so that I don't feel comfortable riding them. But you know, when it gets to the point that I don't have to worry about putting ruts in the trails or anything, I'm going to go back out, and I'm going to try riding not my regular bikes that have, you know, front suspension, or even my dual suspension bike. I'm going to take one of these old school bikes out, and I'm going to see what I can do. And it's probably going to be a learning curve, because I remember the last time I took one of these off road, it was not an easy task, right? But then again, it's been years since I routinely rode a rigid frame off-road. And what I'm essentially trying to, I guess, undo is all the bad habits that I learned, that I think a lot of other people have learned too. Be honest, you've probably done it as well, by relying on the suspension, right? By relying on the artifice of technology to do what I used to know how to do just by manipulating my body and by manipulating the bike. Now, somebody might say, beyond nostalgia, beyond simply wanting to remaster old skills or learn new ones if you've never done it before, what advantage is there to trying to learn how to ride a bike like this, since most bikes aren't like this anymore? And I would argue that there actually is an advantage, because a bike like this does handle better than a bike with a front suspension. A fully rigid frame is always going to be better balanced than a hardtail. There are some hardtails that come close. If the front fork is light enough, they are going to be pretty well balanced. But generally speaking, for most, they're going to be front heavy, and they're just not going to handle as well as a rigid frame. In terms of the ride quality and you manipulating the bike in terms of how much it weighs, how its weight is balanced, etc. Now, in terms of the ride quality, in terms of the suspension mitigating bumps and improving traction, obviously that's an advantage. But again, you pay for that advantage with a disadvantage in weight, in distribution of weight, in other handling characteristics of the bike. And so, because a bike like this, especially for moderate or light off-roading, I mean, if all you're doing is just riding around, you're not doing any downhill stuff, you're not doing any insane tricks, you're just literally just going for a ride in the woods, I honestly think there's no reason that we all couldn't use bikes like this, which are easier to maintain. There's less parts on them. They're lighter. If you have to throw the bike over your shoulder, I can. My other bike, my Univega, weighs about 26 pounds. This one doesn't seem to weigh that much more. I haven't actually weighed this, but check this out. Yeah, if I tried that with a modern full suspension bike, I'd either break my hand or sprain my wrist. It's not a problem with this. If I had to throw this over my shoulder and scramble up a hill or jump over a creek or something, absolutely fine, right? And obviously, loading it and unloading it, if you have to put it in a car or something, take it to the shop or if you're driving to a trailhead that's further away than you can ride to, no problem. Oh, and by the way, if you have to actually, ride to the trailhead, if it's close enough and you want to do that, it's a lot easier on a bike with no suspension, right? Now, I guess if you have a lockout, but there is an advantage to a bike like this in terms of mechanical simplicity, in terms of, how the bike handles, how easy it is for you to manipulate the bike as the rider. The bike that has dual suspension and disc brakes and all sorts of stuff, don't get me wrong, I have a dual suspension bike. It's an older one, but my Kona Dog, but I have one, and I like it. But honestly, I like this more. I like how this handles better. I like how this rides better. It's just, it doesn't have that suspension to take the edge off and improve traction. But like I said, I honestly don't think that if one can relearn the lost skills, that one necessarily needs that, at least for recreational riding. I would much rather be more capable of, doing things on my own than relying on technology for it. I would much rather be able to ride a bike like this from 1995 or 1996. Anybody could buy, if they have enough money in the bank, plop down their credit card, buy a modern bike with the latest and greatest, and ride that. And you'll never know how much of that is the bike doing it for you, and how much of that is you actually have the handling skills and the knowledge. There are certain things that, as a cyclist, you can say to yourself, I'm proud that I know how to do this. And it seems to me that skill set is narrowing and changing with years. For many people it may not be an issue, but I honestly think that my generation is the last one that remembers riding bikes like this. And it doesn't seem to me it was all that long ago. It may have been 20 years, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not a long time, right? And again, yeah, you're older, you're a little more rotund. You're not going to be as fit as you were when you were, 18 or 19, obviously. But that's no reason that you can't still have the skills that you had back then. And I honestly think most of the difficulty of somebody getting back on a bike like this, I honestly don't think it comes from being older or, anything like that. I think it comes from the fact that in the intervening years, I let those skills wither and die because I was riding bikes with suspension. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there's also something to be said for maintaining the old skills, right? It'd be like if you were going target shooting and you could have a red dot scope or a telescopic sight, but it's kind of pointless to learn how to use those before you've learned how to use iron sights, right? You should learn the basics before you do the rest. People aren't learning the basics anymore. And those of us who did have let those skills wither away. So I'm actually going to try and spend more time on rigid bikes. I may not be able to, especially initially, ride as many, serious parts of the trail. But I'm going to try and relearn what I have lost. And, I don't ever want cycling, at least my personal experience as a cyclist, to be like that opening line in the Lord of the Rings movies. Much of what once was is now lost because none now live that remember it. We should remember this. We should keep these skills alive. And I'm going to be honest, there's something awesome about being able to do more with less, right? Because it's clearly you, not the bike. And something as simple as you could buddy hop platform pedals. A lot of people nowadays, I don't think they realize that you can do that. And I think there's two reasons. One, pretty much everybody rides clipless. Now there's a handful of people who still use platform pedals even on newer bikes, but obviously clipless pedals have made a sort of taken over the market. But secondly, I think a lot of modern bikes just are so heavy and poorly balanced that I don't think a lot of people would even try to pony hop them on platform pedals, right? I mean, your basic mountain bike, something like this, or like my Univega, weighed what, like 25, 26 pounds. The most a mountain bike would weigh would be like 27 or 28 pounds. 28, 29 pounds is like your starting point now for a bike that costs way more and has way more stuff. And, there's some advantage for that, but, some of us also like a more versatile bike. And it's kind of ironic that, the suspension and the travel and the disc brakes and the more gears and all that stuff do allow you to do things that you couldn't do with the older technology. But at the same time, the older technology, by virtue of its handling characteristics and its lighter weight, also allowed you to do different things that you can't do with the newer stuff. Just different types of different things. But I still like, when I pick up a bike, if it feels like an anchor, that to me is a downside. And I know people will say, well, if you have the right gear ratio, it shouldn't matter how heavy the bike is. But maybe. Okay, maybe. But I don't like the fact that I've lost perishable skills. I don't like the fact that these sort of things are disappearing from cycling. I think it's a part of our history, and we should try and preserve it. And like I said, there's something to be said for learning the basic skills before you learn to depend on technology for that basic stuff. It's like I said, it's kind of like learning how to shoot with iron sights before you go on to red dots. What's the point of skipping that basic process? You may never need to do it again. You may quickly move on and get a bike with 10 inches of front and rear travel. But the point is, you'll know that you can handle it if you have to. And like I said, there's certain things that, as a cyclist, it's just nice to know about yourself. And definitely that's one of them. So, the bikes, like I said, the bikes back then didn't suck. They were different. But I would argue that they also did teach you to be a better rider, or at least to have a wider range of skill sets. And I think there are certain particular skills peculiar to that type of bike that we have lost or are actively losing. And myself as much as anybody else, like I said, to be honest, I don't feel as comfortable riding a rigid bike now as I did years ago. And I don't think that's just a function of age. I think it's perishable skills perish if they're not utilized and kept sharp. So I'm going to try and spend more time on a rigid bike, and I would suggest that if you really want to, you know, kind of sharpen your skills and maybe become a little more, you know, maybe, I don't know, just seriously examine, you know, what does it mean to be a rider? And, you know, can you maybe, you want to learn something different, or, you know, maybe consider getting a rigid bike, or at the very least riding with your fork locked down. Although, again, you know, the bike's still going to handle, like it has all that weight up front. So, I mean, these things, it's not only that they don't have the suspension travel, which is, of course, a disadvantage. It's that they have the advantage of different handling characteristics because of it. So it really is, you know, there's a yin and a yang to it. It's not all downside. It's not all, well, they lack this and they lack that. There's stuff that they have that modern bikes have given up and sacrificed. And so all of that comes together. It's a very different handling characteristic. And, well, I think it's something that cycling shouldn't lose. Right? You're probably never going to see one of these on the World Cup circuit ever again. But you know what? That's not how most of us ride anyway, right? So my 2 cents on, you know, old bikes and old riding styles, and I'm going to try and spend more time on these just to try and regain the knack. Lone Rider out.